liner is somewhere at sea, bringing to me a traveler who will build my life anew. He's out on the sea, sailing.
Born in the north of England, moved to the south of England when I was very young, and then moved to Jersey in the Channel Isles, and then from there I finished up in Tasmania, and I have been in this country longer than any other.
So do you call yourself Tasmanian?
Oh yeah, well I've been here longer than anywhere else.
But let's go back, if we may, Ralph.
Yep.
Who introduced you to the sea?
A relation of mine came home on leave. He brought home nice things, and of course I was only I was 15 then, and things wasn't too good at home with my stepfather and that. So I left home at 15 and finished up in the Merchant Navy.
And what did you sail on first?
Oh, my first ship to sea was actually just travelling between Southampton and Jersey, the Channel Isles.
Mm-hmm.
I'd done a few trips on that, and then my first deep sea ship was the Andes going to South America, Brazil, Montevideo, Uruguay, and then Argentina. That was my first. Then from there, the Queen Mary as a bellboy.
Seeing South America as a teenage boy, that must have been a thrill.
Oh, yes. Yeah, because I'd never been more than, we'll say, 20 miles away from my house before.
The Queen Mary, of course, was the flagship of the Cunard Line from May 1936 until October 1946. And then she was replaced, I gather, in that role by Queen Elizabeth. But yes, she was the flagship of the Cunard Line.
Oh, yes. She was the one with the blue ribbon. The Queen Mary is the only ship that has got a heart and a soul. She's different.
How is she different? Can you explain what that means, to have a heart and a soul?
Well, you're like a family on board you, and she's like a magnet, keeps drawing you back. You see, in them 7 years I've worked on her, different jobs, I'd left, and then I came back, and I left, and I came back, and I went on other ships, but I kept coming back. She draws you back. There's something about her that you're more happy on that ship than any other.
Gosh, isn't that interesting?
Oh, yes, and I'm not the only person who says that. I've heard this from other people who also worked on her.
When and where did you first lay eyes on the Queen Mary?
Oh, well, in Southampton, of course, when I was working on the other ship, and she pulled in alongside us, and I thought, wow, I want to be on that ship. So that's when I went to the Shipping Federation and signed on, got a job on the Queen Mary.
Was it very competitive to get a job?
Well, I think I was lucky at the time because things weren't that the best. But in them days, my wages was only £8 a month. And I had to buy all my own uniforms and everything. And we had to work 7 days a week, 10 hours a day for that.
Gosh, that sounds like child labour now.
It was, in a way.
And what were your first duties on board?
Well, being a bellboy, of course, I was doing telegrams and opening doors at the dining room, and we had to be doing cleaning up as well. Like I had to look after the chief engineer, keep his cladding right, and wake him up with a cup of tea and all that kind of stuff. You had lots of different jobs.
Did you like that variety?
Oh, yes. 1 minute you was with passengers going round trying to deliver telegrams and look for them, and you went all over the ship then, you see. I'd even take the dogs for a walk up on deck.
Were these dogs that came on board with passengers?
Oh, yeah, yes. You had kennels on board the ship. On the Queen Mary we did, yes.
Were they very pampered poochers?
Oh, yeah, they got the best. For service, nearly.
So you would obviously, as you say, you're all over the ship. You know the ship intimately then. You're probably one of the crew who really does know it best.
Oh, I know her pretty well, yes.
Yeah.
Of course, I was only a bellboy for a very short time. Then I became a cabin class waiter.
A cabin class waiter?
Cabin class, yeah. And that's very good, cabin class. But then I became a first class waiter. But I didn't like first class.
Why was that?
Too much bull.
Too much what, sorry?
Bull. B-U-L-L.
Oh.
Now, cabin class is first class without all that bull.
I see the distinction.
I could get on better there, and I felt more comfortable there, so I stuck with that.
Did the Queen Mary on board offer you the training so you could progress through those ranks, or did you have to kind of seek that out through your own initiative?
Oh, I've been off. Oh, yes, because at one time, just about how you're going along, and you might get, the chief steward might call you in, as he did with me, and said, we want you to go in for training for a head waiter, then on to chief steward. And I said, no, thank you. I'm quite happy where I am. He said, but why don't you want to do that? Go up. I said, well, I might be in charge of people like me, and that would be terrible.
You know yourself well, Ralph.
Yes, I was a bit of a rebel.
What were some of the more memorable experiences you had while serving on board the Queen Mary?
Oh, I think with the Duke of Windsor and Mrs. Simpson.
Oh, really?
Because at this time, I was on the lift. I was a lift man.
Yes.
I better tell you why. I was involved in a bit of a scuffle just before we sailed, and I broke my knuckles. Well, I couldn't tell them on board until we sailed, otherwise I would have got the sack and I'd been sleeping on the park bench, you know.
Yes.
So I just managed with it till we sailed, and then I laid at the bottom of a gangway as a staircase, moaning and groaning when the master of watch came round and one of the officers, and he said, what happened? I said, oh, somebody spilled water on the steps and I fell down and I think I hurt my arm. So they took me to the doctors and said, oh, you got a broken hand. They said, well, you can't be a waiter, put you in charge of the lift. So that's why I finished up as a liftman for that trip, because I broke my knuckles. Did
you meet the Duke of Windsor and Mrs. Simpson in the lift?
Yes, I used to take them up and down on the lift, down to the dining room or, you know, up to the lounge and everything, up, always on the lift. It was up and down. But then when we got to New York, all the passengers was ashore. But the Duke of Windsor and Mrs. Simpson was upstairs, right up top, in the lounge, with all the newsreel people there and having an interview.
Right.
Well, I had to wait for them, and I could go ashore as soon as I'd finished, and I was getting anxious.
Yes.
So I walked just down the corridor, left the lift, walked down the corridor to have a look, and I could see they was packing up. I thought, oh, great. I ran back to the lift. The lift was gone.
Oh.
So I'm banging on the doors, I'm pressing buttons, and then somebody just tapped me on the shoulder and said, are you having trouble, Ralph? And before I turned round, I just said, yes, some rotten bastards pinched my lift. And then when I turned round, it was the Duke of Windsor and Mrs. Simpson. I said, look, I'm awfully sorry, sir. I said, I'll just pop down and get it. So I had to go down 6 flights of staircase, and when I got to my lift, the door was jammed open and the chair jammed in there.
Ah.
So I pulled that out, got the lift going, went back up, opened the door, looked around, it was gone. Oh, no, I thought, that's it, I've got the sack, I'm finished again.
You've lost the royal couple.
Yeah, so then I remembered, I thought, well, I know where the cabin is, so I went down to their deck, I think it was A deck, opened the doors, looked around, looked down to their cabin, no sign of them. I thought, oh, I've missed them. And then all of a sudden, they came down the staircase. I said, look, I'm awfully sorry. I said, somebody had pinched my lift and sabotaged it. And he came over to me, put his hand on my shoulder. He said, now, Sonny, he said, let me tell you, you have done me a really big favour. I said, well, how's that then? He said, we have never walked down the staircase. He said, and we've enjoyed it, and we're going to do it again. He said he's travelled on that ship maybe 10 or 20 times, and that was the first time they've ever walked down the staircase.
So he appreciated the chance to have some exercise and to enjoy, you know, what I imagine would have been the very lush ambience of the Queen Mary.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. What a great story.
And they, you see, when I was taking them up and down in the lift, I could talk to them the same as I'm talking to you.
Yes.
There was a marvellous couple. And a lot of people, you were just a peasant, a servant, you know.
Yes.
But not with them. Wearing a mink stole, you know, the short one.
Yes.
It was a pastel blue.
Ooh.
Oh, fantastic.
That was something to see. And then were you able to step ashore in New York?
Oh, yes, yes.
Did that impress you as a young man?
Oh, yeah, it really did. I went to Radio City, watched the musical, the dancers there and the movies and the shopping, unbelievable. Things was cheap there compared with England on something, and yet their wages are much more than ours. And but I used to go a lot to the Salvation Army stores, what we used to call Sally Armies, and I used to, actually I was doing a bit of smuggling. I used to get washing machines and smuggle them into England.
Not on the Queen Mary.
Yeah. And I used to buy lots of clothes and stuff there. All my dress suits, my tuxedos, could have belonged to film stars and where they give it to Salvation Army.
But they were good quality and really affordable.
The best. And all my dress shirts was all Arrow and all that, the very expensive ones, but I get them for next to nothing.
And then would you sell them when you were back home?
Well, no, not them kind of clothes, but other things I did, like the washing.
Like the washing machine?
That I did, yes.
That would have been a nice earner potentially for you.
Well, yes, 'cause like I say, the wages was next to nothing.
Yes.
So tips was the main thing.
So when you've been at sea on the Queen Mary, we can imagine, the grandeur of a deck. But where did you sleep, and can you describe your cabin?
Well, my cabin was nicknamed the Iron Lung. There was 6 of us in it, and only 3 can get out of bed at once.
Oh.
Now, there's no furniture, only bunks. Then you had a tin locker. And when you get out of bed, in a very narrow room, and you couldn't even leave your shoes on the floor because underneath us was a boiler. And the toes were cooled up into the heels because of the hot boiler underneath us.
Oh.
And if I stretched my arm out at night, I stretched my shoulder, I'd scald my arm on hot pipes.
Oh.
That's how bad. You had no bunk curtains. We did have a porthole, but it was down on the waterline, so it was never open. It was really bad. But if you go in the next cabin, there could be 12 or 14 in that cabin, and they're all on different watches, so the lights never went out. And the chaps are smoking. There's no furniture, so they only sat on the bottom bunk. But if you was trying to sleep in your bunk, you're on the bottom bunk, people are sitting there, they're gambling, playing cards, or doing things, And that's how bad it was, really bad. In fact, at one stage, there was the public health came on board, and there was a locker where they kept all the potatoes, and the public health condemned it, said you can't keep potatoes in that locker. So they said, okay, we'll move them. They took them out, they put bunks in there, and they put the liftmen in there. It was not good enough for potatoes, but it was good enough for crew.
Goodness me, that speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yep.
Well, Ralph, tell us about the reunion. And I'm speaking with Ralph Rushton, who's a resident of Beaumaris on the East Coast and a crewman of the Queen Mary in the 1950s. You've just returned from a reunion. Can you tell us how you even heard about this?
Oh, well, on the internet, I was into a site called Lovers of the Ocean Liners, and also Queen Mary site, and they got in contact with me a few years ago, kept asking me to go. But, of course, it costs us money to go that way, I'm only on a pension. And one day, I called my 2 children in, that's my son and my daughter and the wife. I said, now look, I've made my mind up, I've made my bucket list up, and I am going to spend my kids' inheritance. And my kids said, good on you, and we're coming with you, and we're going to help you to spend it. So I took them all to Long Beach, California, to meet my old girlfriend from the 1950s. But then, I haven't told you the name of my girlfriend, though, have I?
No. What's her name? Is she a curvaceous young lady?
Oh, yes. The RMS Queen Mary.
And they all came with you. That's wonderful.
All went. And when we got there, and they put me into the same cabin what the Duke of Windsor and Mrs. Simpson stayed in, Royalty stayed in, And if I'd have known when I was just a boy and a liftman that I would one day sleep in the same cabin as them, it was unbelievable.
The hair on the back of my neck stand up just imagining that.
That's how I felt when I got on there and realised all this, what was happening. And everywhere I went, people would just stop and say, "You're Ralph." I said, "Yes, I know." "But how do you know?" They said, "The word is out. Everybody on the ship is trying to get in contact with you because they want to hear your stories." Letter and fruit and champagne in the cabin delivered and all this kind of carry on. And then at one time, we went for a meal, and when they came round giving the bill, I said, "Well, where's mine?" And he said, "No, that's already been fixed." I said, "No," I've got to pay my way. I said, "Who's paid for it?" And the chaps at the other end, there's about 20 on the table, and the far end, I said, "Who's paid for mine? I'll fix you up." And they said, "No, it was at the other end of the table." I said, "Come on, what's going on?" Then one chap said, "Your money's no good here. You've paid by coming here and telling us all the stories and showing us around."
Oh.
And that's how it went on. Even when I went to the bars for a drink, they told me my money was no good. And I even had, walking along the promenade deck, a young lady comes along and says, "Oh, excuse me, you're Ralph." I said, "Yeah, I know." And she says, "My husband would like to take a photograph of me with you. Is that okay?" I said, "Yes, no problem." So she kissed me on the cheek and he took a photograph of it. And I don't know her, at all.
Heavens.
This is the kind of thing that was happening. And when I went to the bar, I had all these people coming over because the word was getting around that I was an ex-crew member. And it was I'm still on the high now thinking about it.
And I believe you were the oldest former crewman at the reunion, is that correct?
Well, yes, because in fact I was the only crew member. All the others, believe it or not, some was only young people, but they are Queen Mary mad. And they could tell me more about the Queen Mary than I knew, like measurements and horsepower and all those kind of things. But they knew nothing about the actual living on the ship and the running of it, the crew side. And that's what they wanted to know.
Ralph Rushton, I think we could easily fill another hour or more with recollections of your time on the Queen Mary.
Yeah.
I'm delighted. That's a wonderful story that you ultimately spent time at the Eisenhower Suite. As you say, something you couldn't possibly imagine you would ever have done when you were working on board. Many thanks for speaking with Statewide Weekends.
No problem. I've enjoyed it too.
Sailing to me, when shall I see my lover come home from the sea? Hurry to me, great liner, for you can make my dream come true. Wherever you be,